It's a name, of course, that became synonymous with education and the big debate we had here in Australia over the last 10 years. Because it's 10 years ago this week that businessman David Gonski gave his big landmark education report on schools funding to the then Prime Minister Julia Gillard and kicked off one almighty fight and spending spree. Remember that catch cry, I give a Gonski? But what happened with all that money? Tens of billions of dollars. Did it hit the bullseye or not? Are Australian students any better off? Glenn Fahey is a research fellow at the Centre for Independent Studies and the author of Dollars and Cents, Time for Smart Reform of Australian School Funding. He joins me now from Sydney. All right, Glenn, give us the nutshell. How much more money is the Commonwealth spending on schools compared to the 10 years ago when the Gonski report landed? And have we got bang for our buck?
Hi, Peter. Well, look, we're spending 40% more than just 6 years ago when the Gonski funding first kicked in. And to put that in context, the bill is now around $70 billion a year when you combine Commonwealth and state public funding to schools, and that's compared to $50 billion beforehand. Now, this is an extraordinary increase. It's resulted in more teachers, more pay for teachers, and an absolute army of support teachers around them. What's important, over the years, we've seen, so take the 20-year period, we saw student numbers increase. Now, that increases the demand for staff, but students increase by about 1/5. School teachers increased by about 1/3, and administration doubled. So it's 5 times more administrative staff than the growth in students. So what we see is that the money is going into more staffing, but it's not necessarily producing better results. And the sad part is we've known this for decades. Money alone is no guarantee of better outcomes. And our results have proven this. Results have been in decline. We've made no dent in reducing the inequality gap. And of course, our standards overall have simply weakened rather than strengthened. So it's really a fail when it comes to assessing Gonski.
Just on that, talk to me about our international rankings over the time frame.
So we've had 2 PISA assessments since Gonski started, and on both occasions we've continued, even accelerated, the decline that we've been experiencing. Over the last 20 years, Australia has gone from being among the top countries in the world to being around the middle of the pack. And it means that an Australian student today is around 14 months by the age of 15 behind an Australian just in 2003. And if we compare that to the rest of the world, we're years behind the best. And yet we're funded better than almost any other country in the world. We've had some of the fastest increases in spending. And the increase in spending isn't done yet. Remember that the big fight around Gonski was whether we would guarantee the first 4 years or the entire 6-year period, those last 2 years that were the time bomb fiscally, because it banked in significant further increases. Now they're locked in for good. And at this point, I see no serious scrutiny of where that money's going and whether it could be better invested. Ultimately, that's what we need to ensure. Is, again, here, it's not about blaming teachers for the failure to turn around results. It's to make a better investment so that they can do a better job and get the results that warrant the kind of investment that's being made.
And of course, for all this money, we're still fighting about a woke curriculum. Look, I grew up in a little tiny country town and we didn't have much money in the school. It was one of those smell of an oily rag schools. But you remember the teacher and you remember what you were taught. You don't remember whether you had air conditioning, which we didn't, or any of those things. That's the actual game changer, isn't it? The teacher and what we teach.
Exactly. And this is the mistake that was made all the way back at Gonski, was they observed that there were differences in outcomes in schools and there were differences in resources to schools. And they concluded that it must be the difference in resources that's to blame for the difference in outcomes. And of course, that's completely wrong. It should have always said there's differences in outcomes in schools, and even more, there's differences in outcomes between classrooms. And then said, well, what is it about those successful classrooms that is driving success? That's the key mistake that was always made from the beginning. In the end, all we did was commit educational insanity, more money to do the exact same thing we were doing before.
Glenn, it will be a feature debate, I'm sure, of the upcoming election. That point you make about the funding spike and now that continued funding level. I think we'll pull into that in some greater detail because I think people really need to understand that that's a huge debt bomb there in education that we'll get into in the next little while. We've run out of time, but I appreciate you being on the program this evening. Glenn Fahey there, education expert at the Centre for Independent Studies.